Welcome to React Roundup. I'm your host, Jack Harrington, and with me today is my esteemed colleague, TJ Vantol.
Hey, everybody.
As well as Sam Magura. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
Yeah. So, Sam, you did a blog post recently around CSS-in-JS. So,
Yep.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can kind of see how that segues into other things?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote this post in October. It was titled Why We're Breaking Up with CSS and JS. And it's kind of a combination of my personal journey with the technology and then also at my company Spot, like how I saw them using the technology and how I eventually realized that it was really harming us in terms of runtime performance of our React app. But yeah, so the post, I basically just went through what's attractive about this technology, which is like you get the locally scoped styles. You can use JavaScript variables in your styles. You can put the styles right in the same TSX file as your component. Like there's a lot of convenience that comes with it, but there's also a lot of nasty things that come with it. So I was actually a contributor to the Emotion project, which is the second most popular.
So you were bought in.
Oh yeah, I was way in. Yeah, I was like pretty much the number 2 contributor to that project for about a year, which isn't saying a ton because the project it receives like critical maintenance only, basically. It's very hard to contribute to. Like it's still written in Flow and...
no way, really?
It is, yeah. I was actually working on converting it to TypeScript, but it was a huge task.
I'm guessing a lot of people listening don't even know what Flow is, but okay.
Yeah.
Alternative TypeScript.
Yeah, the Facebook version of TypeScript. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
To take even a bigger step back, I want to start by just saying we should define CSS in JavaScript, just for our very basics. Let's say maybe even get us started with what is the tech? I guess we can focus on the positive too early. Like what sort of things drew you in? Maybe give some real world examples of how you've used it sort of successfully.
Yeah, I mean, so just at a super basic level. I mean, back in the old days, you had your HTML file, you had your CSS file. They were separate things. You wrote classes in the CSS that applied to the HTML, but I'm not really sure what caused people to think we should start writing those CSS classes inside of our JavaScript. But that's really what it is.
I mean, I think I just wanted it in a single file.
Yeah, it is pretty nice.
Yeah, you had to have this external CSS file, and it was either in the same directory. Now you got a directory per component. It was a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, and I mean, CSS organization is a historic pain point for any large company, any large app. So you have different CSS structures, but those can get hard, especially on large teams, right? And then you end up with this situation where it's oh crap, what styles are even controlling this random header or button I'm in? It might be in 3 different files in 3 different places, and it's a challenge that we've had for a long time.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think the core challenge there is that CSS is global by default. Mm-hmm. So you style your class .mybutton. Anything in your entire huge enterprise app that has that class is getting those styles. And so CSS-in-JS kind of fixes that by making styles locally scoped by default. And it does that by generating a artificial class name for each piece of CSS that you write. And so that's one of the big appeals to it, in addition to being in the same file as your React or other JavaScript code.
It amazes me how much we've done to get around cascading in cascading style sheets.
That is really true. Yeah.
Right? That was supposed to be the benefit. You're supposed to be able to create a body tag that has the right font, and then everything cascades from that.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to get around it. So we did the CSS and JS. So why is it inefficient? Did you drill down into the actual implementation and find out
So I profiled some of our components that were using it heavily. I didn't thoroughly profile Emotion itself, but I do have some pretty good guesses for why it's not performant. So one of them is you write like a CSS string or an object style in your JavaScript code, and then Emotion has to convert that to a serialized style, is what it's called in the code base, which is like piece of CSS text that can be directly inserted into the document. And the way it's shown in the Emotion documentation and how I think a lot of people do it is that style serialization happens on every render of your React component. So if your component's rendering, 15 times per second, it's doing all this work to serialize those styles for every tag that you use CSS and JS on.
Oh, wow.
On every render. And so I think that's a big performance cost. And then another one, which is much harder to observe, is that like the way almost every CSS and JS library works, even compile time ones, is when a component mounts, it inserts its style into the DOM. And browsers like to cache like all of the style rules for a page. And so whenever you have a new component mount, it inserts new style rules, and that invalidates this kind of internal browser caching mechanism, which causes the browser to have to redo a lot of work. So it's hard to see that really in practice, but that is another performance impact from it.
Yeah, I think it's funny because at its core, the CSS and JavaScript is somewhat replacing some of the browser's built-in ways of handling these processes, because the browser, by default, the browser is going to handle the CSS sort of parsing and applying it to things. And essentially, you're somewhat replicating that in JavaScript. And the difference there is if the browser is doing it, it's like optimized C code. That's running in the background, that's doing this on your behalf. And if JavaScript's doing it, it's first of all more code for the user to download, just the download time. But I think the bigger cost is the like you said, the runtime nature of this, because JavaScript's just got to do more work that otherwise it would just defer to the browser to take care of.
And also the stuff the browser is doing is totally separated from the React render loop. But if you're serializing those styles in render, it's happening every render, which you want to limit what happens every render as much as possible.
Yeah, the browser can multi-thread the handling of some of this stuff, whereas your JavaScript code is not. That stuff's just got to happen. And I think too that it's another one of those situations where it really depends on the scale you're operating with, I feel like, because just to take the simplest example, if you're building Hello World with CSS and JS and you're adding one or two components, there's like a 0% chance you're going to notice any performance issues because it's gonna parse like a small group of styles. It's going to paint them. It's going to do them in like 2 milliseconds. It's not going to be human perceivable. No one's going to care. And that's probably true even up to, I mean, my guess would be even to like small websites that it's almost going to be somewhat negligible. But I'm curious, like, what was your flag? Like, what sort of cued you into this? Because it's that this might be a problem, that this might be something that you needed to investigate. Were you getting like user reports of problems? Was it starting to get to the point where you could like visually see differences? Or
that is a really good question. And I'm going to have to think very hard back in my memory to remember why. So yeah, we have a pretty big app at Spot, and I was tasked with just improving the performance of the app overall. And so I was both looking at things like, using a service worker for caching, and also like, once the app is loaded, how do we optimize the rendering of these React components? And so I think I started where everyone should start, which is using the React DevTools profiler. And in that profiler, I saw that, so at Spot, we weren't just using Emotion like directly on DOM elements. We had all of these kind of style primitive components like box and flex and typography and heading 1, heading 2, which are actually React components that we're using Emotion to apply styles. And I just saw that these little components were actually a kind of non-trivial amount of our render times in the profiler. And so that's what caused me to be like, all right, I'm going to take this page, I'm going to rewrite it with plain CSS, and I'm going to compare the performance. And that was really like the kind of aha moment where I was like, that cut the render time in half.
Oh, wow.
So half of our time rendering this component was just attaching CSS to these box components and these flex components and these typography components. And it's like, we were really deriving very little value from those components over like using something like CSS modules or utility classes, which would have been much more performant. And so big cost, little value.
Yeah, it wasn't the existence of box that, like, because I think folks, like, I think there's a sentiment out there where we want to reduce the number of components overall. Like, there's some overhead, natural overhead to components. What you're saying is the fact that there was a box, that's fine. It was the fact that we were laying out box with this particular method of CSS. That was the problem.
I think that's kind of a complex issue. So yes, the fact that we were using CSS and JS inside of that box component was the main problem. I think the total number of components is really maybe focused on too much. Like just in my experimentation, like React is very efficient with dealing with large number of components. Yeah. And then the third thing I would say, though, is like if you have a component called box, you're going to want to style it with props, which means you're either using CSS and JS or you're using inline styles, neither of which are ideal for performance. But at least inline styles don't really hurt your render times. It's only more of a browser performance thing.
It's funny. The other thing you have listed in your article is how CSS and JavaScript clutters the React dev tools. And that's something I've ran into before as well. And it seems like such a small thing, but like those sort of developer conveniences can really just make your life more difficult. And those little things like that do legitimately translate into lost time, lost productivity, lost money, all those sorts of things. Because you don't want to be sifting through all these from your image, like insertion, emotion, CSS. Because then you're looking at this and your brain loses any construct of like what this component tree actually is, because it just looks like a hot mess.
The signal to noise ratio is just really low there. Yeah, I mean, it's like if we're using this technology because we feel like it has a better developer experience, then it really is fair to criticize it, and that, well, the developer experience is not better when you're using the dev tools.
So then I'm curious, then you identify these problems, you decide that there is some definite performance gains to be made. I do want to get in a chat of like what sort of things you do recommend now, or what other things you investigated. But I'm curious your process of if to choose to migrate away from that. Like, what is that process like? Did you end up converting the app, or is that something that's in progress? How much of a pain did that end up being?
So I guess I'll start with like, what do I recommend now?
Yes,
which
please.
is,
what is the magic answer? Well, I'll go convert all of my apps.
Basically, CSS modules are the magic answer for me. I mean, they provide the locally scoped styles. You don't have to do it this way, but a lot of people will write a CSS module right next to the component. So like you have mybutton.tsx, mybutton.module.css. It's like, it's not in the same file, but it still keeps things closely tied to each other so that it's not confusing. And I like the extra power that Sass gives you. So I actually do CSS modules with Sass. But I mean, if you don't like Sass, you don't have to use it. That's just kind of like a extra syntactic sugar on top. And then I do kind of like utility classes for really simple things like you want to make this div have display flex. Like, it's annoying to have to define a CSS class for that. So I do think utility classes have their place. We are using kind of a forked version of the Bootstrap utility classes, which was mainly because that's what I was familiar with, having used Bootstrap for many years. Of course, Tailwind is the most popular utility class framework. Yeah, which I have some opinions on Tailwind. Yeah. I haven't used it that much, but I mean, they even say this in their docs, like it's effectively like writing inline styles. So you end up with a lot of duplication. And I'm sure someone who loves Tailwind would tell me why my opinion is wrong, that that's a bad thing. But yeah, I just feel like a huge benefit of CSS is that you can define a class once and then use it in 100 places. And I just don't really see how you're supposed to do that with Tailwind.
Well, Jack likes Tailwind, so I'm waiting to hear the defense here.
I'm conflicted about it because on the one hand, I love like MX-2, right? It's so nice. Like just throw that into a class and you're good, right? But then when I look at like a button and the button's got like 40 classes on it. And it's just like, what is going on? And so it's very, it's like cognitive dissonance when it comes to this. It's hard for me to justify it really. So yes, I like it, but I also don't like it.
Yeah. So I guess we're using a more of a pared down utility class approach where we do have the MX-2, but we're not trying to apply all of the button styles just with the utility classes. We just, use CSS modules for more complex things like that.
Right. I think actually, if there was, and I'm sure you can do this, but you can just basically take Tailwind and take all of the, because there's CSS that's like layout, and there's CSS that's styling. And I'd like to have the CSS that's styling kind of be one thing, and that layout thing, the MX2 or whatever. I think that's really handy. Just being able to say like flex, blah 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 blah, and you're good. Like that would be great.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's something like what you've got. You've got basically CSS modules plus that.
Yeah. So kind of the way I do it is like, if I can write all of the styles for this element just with a few utility classes, I'll do it that way. But if I get to the point where I need to apply a style that can't be done with our utility classes, then I'll just write all the styles for that element in plain CSS or CSS modules, really. So yeah, I don't really divide it like you do between these are styling attributes and these are layout attributes, but that is a good way to think about it.
Hey, have you heard about our book club? I keep hearing from people who have heard about the book club. I'd love to see you there. This month we are talking about Docker Deep Dive. That's the book we're reading. It's by Nigel Poulsen. And we're going to be talking about all things Docker, just how it works, how to set it up on your machine, how to go about taking advantage of all the things it offers, and using it as a dev tool to make sure that what you're running in production mirrors what you're running on your machine. And it's just one of those tools a lot of people use. Really looking forward to diving into it. That's February and March. April and May, we're going to be doing the Pragmatic Programmer. And we're going to be talking about all of the kinds of things that you should be doing in order to further your career according to that book. Now, of course, I have my own methodology for these kinds of things, but we're going to be able to dovetail a lot of them because a lot of the ideas really mesh really nicely. So if you're looking for ways to advance your career, you're looking to learn some skills that are going to get you ahead in your career, then definitely come join the book club. You can sign up at topenddevs.com/book club.
I'm curious, have you experimented with Svelte at all and the way it approaches CSS? Because
I have not, so I don't know anything about that.
It's fun because I'm also a fan of your approach. For the big React app I work on, we use the exact same approach. We have CSS modules that are with Sass. We like Sass too, because it's just some of the niceties, syntax niceties and like variables and stuff like that tend to be really nice. But I've got a small little utility app that I worked on last year in Svelte, and they do styles that are scope styles, but you can write them in the same file. And then it comes, though, as I understand it, and this, I'm also not the world's biggest Svelte expert, but it sort of like bakes them into the components. So I don't think, and this is the part where we need our listeners to like fact check us on it, but I don't think it comes with some of the baggage of like the CSS in JavaScript approach, because as I understand it, it kind of almost generates a module for you that's scoped. But
okay,
and it also works a lot like Vue, because Vue lets you do something similar as well, where you just write a style in their file. I think as I'm talking now, I'm like starting to doubt myself.
Well, I mean, this is React Roundup. We don't have to know about other frameworks.
About Svelte. Oh, yeah. Although we end up talking about it so often.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I mean, I don't think there's a single React developer. I think it's important to know a bit about the broader ecosystem, right? Because React's not always the right tool for it. But it does show when I try to speak from a position of authority on things that I've only toyed with here or there.
Yeah. But I think the other thing you asked, TJ, was how are we migrating our app from this like heavily CSS-in-JS approach to more of the CSS modules and utility classes. And it hasn't been a like, all right, drop everything. We're going to rewrite the whole app using CSS modules right now. It's like we were already using CSS modules for some things. So it's more like if we add a new component or heavily rework a component, we're going to convert it to the new styling system. But we're not like aggressively trying to remove every instance of that box component, which I think there's still probably like 1,000 times that we use that box in the code base.
I'm kind of surprised though. So I mean, wouldn't you just change box once and get the fix everywhere?
That's the problem, though, that I spoke about earlier, which is like, so box takes in all sorts of props like flex and padding and margin. And so if you want to rewrite that component without using CSS and JS, you would basically have to use inline styles, which honestly would probably be more performant, but inline styles are still not ideal when you have those same inline styles applied to many elements. So that's why we didn't go with that approach, though that would have been a quicker way to extract the CSS and JS from the code base.
That makes sense.
It's interesting too, because this actually strikes me. We talk to a lot of people. A lot of people end up on this show because they've migrated from some technology to another technology. It's like a common pattern, I guess, of guests or just reasons people reach out. Mm-hmm. This actually strikes me as one of the somewhat simpler migrations because these two technologies can easily coexist.
Exactly.
Whereas in some other cases, we've had some people migrate JavaScript to TypeScript or Angular to React or those sorts of things. And those are things where they're solvable problems, but you have to get kind of creative in how you approach this. Whereas this, it's just I could totally see it being like a backlog item. If you're there, touch it. Probably at some point, once you get to a reasonable number, there probably will be put some intern on the last pass of getting rid of all of them.
Yeah, it's a very easy migration. Yeah, I think JavaScript to TypeScript is hard, but it's not undoable because you can have a mix. But when you said Angular to React, that sounds horrifying.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what episode it was, but we had somebody that they were using both for rendering on the same time on the same page, and they had it working. So you can get
that is wild.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys played around with Next.js 13 at all in the new app directory.
I have not.
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So their default thing is module-based CSS, right? That's out of the box. And I think it was out of the box too for the pages directory. I think that's always just been their shtick. But emotion and CSS and JS just clearly don't work, and anything built on top of it don't work either. You gotta switch it into the client mode, which is terrible. Even the CSS-in-JS extracted stuff, which I think is supposed to take away some of the performance issues that we're talking about, like vanilla extract. That doesn't work either.
Even that doesn't work. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I really tried, honestly. There's some sort of, when you get to vanilla extract, that's actually when you start getting into the whole world of the SWC issues with the compiler.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's a mess.
Yeah, I really want to use SWC for everything, but then you run into any library that needs some kind of compiler transform, and it's back to Babel.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. What is SWC? What am I missing here?
It's an alternative compiler. I think it's written in Rust, I want to say.
Yeah, it's Rust.
It's tough to know Rust or Go nowadays. Which one's trying to eat the JavaScript ecosystem as a new whatever. But yeah, it's a transpiler. I don't think it has type check. I don't think it does type checking, but it does TypeScript, language removal and transpiling. Yeah, and then there's also ES build is another one. I think that's kind of falling to the wayside. But next picked SWC, and that's kind of giving it a lot of impetus.
Okay,
because it's next. Yeah. And anything next does, we're in.
Well, and then the server rendering part that's because it's server rendering the page, it can't bake in the JavaScript handling of the styles, more or less. It would be the reason why the CSS and JS stuff doesn't work, or is it just that the next team is chosen not to build in the integrations necessary to make it happen?
They actually have a documentation page specifically around this. I'm sorry to dominate the podcast. They have a documentation page around this for CSS and JS, and apparently the issue is that it is incompatible with React 18's concurrency mode. Not that, there's a whole thing around concurrency, and it's no longer a mode. It's kind of weird, but whatever. It's incompatible with that, and therefore it's incompatible with React server components, and there you go. And so CSS modules for everybody.
I'm a bit surprised about the comment that it's not compatible with React concurrent mode, because Emotion should be compatible with that using use insertion effect, which is a hook that they added specifically to make CSS and JS work in concurrent mode. But there's just a huge amount of complexity around server-side rendering with CSS and JS. So it's really not surprising to me that it doesn't work. I mean, like back when I was trying to fix issues in the Emotion project, we would just get issue after issue about SSR not working with different frameworks. So yeah, I have a feeling it would be a lot of work for the Next.js team to get that working with the new app directory. And so probably just not worth the cost.
Yeah.
So then the other thing you brought up is some of these, the compile time CSS and JavaScript frameworks.
Yeah.
So maybe Sam, you could explain like what those are, like what the difference in approach is and maybe how they work.
So caveat or disclaimer, I haven't directly used any of these libraries, but compile time CSS and JS is like basically you want to write the same code that you were doing with emotion or style components, but instead of that being converted to plain CSS at runtime, we want to do it at build time instead so that the end user doesn't pay the performance cost. And so it sounds like a really good idea, and I think it is a better idea, but there's still some downsides to it, like going back to the box component where it takes in a prop called background color. If you're providing a different background color every time you use the box, there's no way to statically extract that style. Like it's just not known at compile time what the background color is. And so these compile time libraries, they're able to statically extract a lot of styles, but in the case of like a style that is from a prop, they basically would set background color equals variable background color in the CSS, and then they would use an inline style to define a CSS variable that sets the background color. So they basically fall back to inline styles when they have to. So that's one of the problems. And then another one is you still have that issue of you're inserting new styles when a new component mounts, which invalidates that browser caching thing I talked about. So I think it's an improvement, but it still has some of the downsides of traditional runtime CSS and JS.
Yeah, I feel like it's closer because to me, this approach feels like it should be the holy grail because I almost wonder if somebody will eventually nail this approach and that can get it to take off, because it seems me very naively looking at this problem, I feel like there should be some way where I can define my styles in my component and some magical tool will extract them, place them into like some global style sheet, but maintain this, like generate a dynamic name. So it's like pseudo scoped and that those styles will be available for that component. And I don't know if you can solve the dynamic styling. That part might be tricky, but it feels like even if you could just get static styles in a way where you could define them in the component, they get registered globally, and I don't pay any of the runtime performance penalties, that would be my sort of ideal workflow for working with this. And I don't know if we're quite there yet.
I think some of those libraries are close to that. I don't know if they'll ever be able to reach exactly that ideal that you're speaking of.
Yeah, because it has to you almost need like a Next.js level tool that controls everything for you to kind of pull that off. Like a sort of an isolated tool doesn't control enough, I feel like, to almost be able to pull that off. It's tough.
And I think there's a lot of self-discipline required to stick to static styles that can be extracted and not just use dynamic styles all over the place.
Yeah, that's problematic because it's so easy. If you have those like properties on it, it's just, when it's this, make it roundy. When it's that, it's nice.
I don't know. Like, I feel like a tool could maybe enforce that. And I mean, inline styles exist for a reason. They're not like, they're not evil. I mean, there's legitimate use cases of them where you might want to switch display on and off or like things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I still maintain
they're totally valid. There are use cases where, you definitely should be using inline styles. It's just like, you never want inline styles to be the foundation of all of your styling for your whole app.
I do agree with that. Sam, another question for you. I'm curious, what made you want to write this up? Because I'll be honest, I thought this was a really excellent article. You've got like,
Thank you.
I don't know if you ever desire this, but you've got a future in like marketing or dev role because you got like a nice clickbaity title, nicely organized. nice.
That's an art.
It's like marketing, I know, is an evil word, but you've got a talent for it. So I guess what made you want to sort of share and talk about this?
Yeah. So really two main factors. I guess the smaller one is that my boss, Gordon at Spot, was like, hey, this would be a good blog post. You should write this up and we'll post it on our blog. And we did actually get like a customer lead through someone who had read the blog post. So, but the bigger thing was like, I kind of felt like this was a big problem that no one was talking about. And as someone who had like advocated a lot for CSS and JS in the past, I felt like someone needed to like just not try to tear down this technology, but just inform people that if you use it this way, there is a significant runtime cost. And so I felt like I needed to tell people about that.
I'm sort of fascinated that no one had sort of wrote this story earlier, because I feel like, and even just take 30 seconds in the comments and you see people that are chiming in with their own stories of this sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting to me that this hasn't come up before and that more people aren't.
Yeah, because it was surprising.
Because I mean, CSS and JavaScript has a huge number of users, right? It's just as a general technology, it's fairly widespread, and I'm positive there are tons of big organizations that are relying on this now. So I'm just surprised that it has not come up.
Yeah. And the thing is, even if you're not using it directly, you still might be using it because they're big component libraries like MUI is the one that comes to mind, that it's all powered by style components or emotion. And I know there's other ones that are the same way.
Yeah, Chakra, all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the reasons why I figured out that CSS and JS and emotion were the problem. You try to bring up Next.js 13 and you're like, great, this is awesome. React server components are great. Now I want to just use my Material UI just because I'm, it looks decent, whatever. And you bring that in and kaboom, right away.
Yep.
And you just try to add a button to a page. And it was a little scary too, because it's complaining about create context. I'm like, oh my God, does context not at all work? And that turned out to be kind of a lark, because it's actually just around this concurrency mode, blah, blah, blah. But it was scary.
Yeah, that's definitely not a good first time using Next 13 experience.
Right?
I'm sure they would like to avoid that. Yeah.
I'm curious what you learned from the feedback you've gotten from this article, because there are a whole lot of comments here, and I know you've probably heard on social media and stuff about this. Like, well, what's been the reception? I'm sure there's been some. Yeah.
I felt like the reception to this article is very positive. I've done articles in the past and kind of learned, don't say anything controversial unless you really can back it up, because people will roast you on that thing that you said. And so I managed to stay fairly non-controversial on this post, except for one thing, which is I quoted, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Sebastian Markbadge, one of the React team guys, about the problems of CSS and JS in concurrent mode. And I unintentionally took that quote out of context and kind of misrepresented it. But it was such a subtle and such a advanced thing that the only person who called me out on it was Dan Abramov.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. He tweeted about my article, and I felt so nervous after that. I was like, oh my God, I got to race home and fix the thing in the article that's wrong. And he had just pointed out that I had described the problem without mentioning the solution that the React team had implemented for that problem. And yeah, so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but also cool to have been noticed by the React guy.
That is very fun. I think Dan is addicted to. It's amazing how many times I see him just nitpicking random React articles, and it just boggles my mind. He must have Google alerts for these things and sits around and watches
Yeah.
them talks. It's kind of fascinating.
I kind of get where he's going, though. I mean, in a way, you kind of got to defend React, and these sort of things can spin out of control. You know, there's definitely a culture of old wives' tales when it comes to software engineering and web engineering in particular. The whole, you have to do SEO, SSR to be good for SEO kind of old wives' tale. And it's
that's an old wives' tale?
Yeah.
I could never get a solid answer to that question. Whether
No. Google for a whole, almost a decade now has been parsing client side. It's fine. But, I think, there's an SEO community out there that's not technical. It's more about tagging and stuff. And their basically thing is they just tell the engineers, hey, we just need SSR. That's because that's what we've been told, whatever. And the engineer's I don't want to fight it. SSR. But yeah, so if you've let these things kind of get out, then, people will start quoting it and quoting it and quoting it and quoting it, and it just explodes. And so I can imagine why. I don't know what this particular thing was, but I can certainly see Dan wanting to do that. I guess it's his job in a way.
Well, I think that's kind of like the quirk about him that's made him who he is just his like superhuman dedication and the effort he puts into it. So
they have to. I was thinking about React. Isn't it like basically? I mean, it's the number one web platform outside of like jQuery, like in existence. Like it's just. I mean, it's a huge platform. Just like there's millions and millions and millions of downloads.
Yeah, way ahead of Angular or Vue.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable that programming languages like on the back end, we have so many competing technologies. It's like every company kind of uses a different language, but React is like kind of a unifying factor in that not everyone uses it. There are other popular frameworks, but it's really like dominating that market, so to speak.
Yeah, you don't see like Go and Run, there's definitely like a whole culture out there of using Go as the new kind of Java to do like microservices and that stuff. And a lot of examples you see, it's like React on top of Go. It's not like they've decided that, we're going to create our new, Go based web framework. No. We're not going to try to compete with React on the front end. We're just going to grant them the web, and we'll just be the folks in the back.
Yeah, well, it's pretty challenging to compete with JavaScript in the browser. I mean, Microsoft is trying to do it with C# and Blazor, which compiles your C# code to WebAssembly, but I think there are some pretty big downsides to that approach.
And WebAssembly is certainly something to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting. I just haven't yet seen this is the killer app for WebAssembly. Yeah.
Big time. Well, Sam, this has been awesome. Have we neglected to ask you any questions that you think we should have asked you during this?
No, A+ for asking good questions. I feel like you brought out my interesting opinions.
All right. Well, we try.
Hey, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the Top End Devs membership and let you know what we've got coming up this month. So in February, we have a whole bunch of workshops that we're providing to members. You can go sign up at topenddevs.com/sign up. If you do, you're going to get access to our book club. We're reading Docker Deep Dive, and we're going to be going into Docker and how to use it and things like that. We also have workshops on the following topics, and I'm just going to dive in and talk about what they are real quick. First, it's how to negotiate a raise. I've talked to a lot of people that they're not necessarily keen on leaving their job, but at the same time, they also want to make more money. And so we're going to talk about the different ways that you can approach talking to your boss or HR or whoever about getting that raise that you want and having it support the lifestyle you want. That one's going to be on February 7th. February 9th, we're going to have a Career Freedom Mastermind. Basically, you show up, you talk about what's holding you back, what you dream about doing in your career, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to actually brainstorm together, you and whoever else is there, and I, all of us are going to brainstorm on how you can get ahead. The next week on the 14th, we're going to talk about how to grow from junior developer to senior developer, the kinds of things you need to be doing, how to do them, that kind of a thing. On the 16th, we're going to do a Visual Studio or VS Code tips and tricks. On the 21st, we're going to talk about how to build a software course. And on the 23rd, we're going to talk about how to go freelance. And then finally, on February 28th, we're going to talk about how to set up a YouTube channel. So those are the meetups that we're going to have along with the book club. And I hope to see you there. That's going to be at topenddevs.com/sign up.
And now we get into a segment called Picks, where we get to talk about kitchen utensils or shows we're watching or whatever. So, TJ, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to pick the movie Megan, which is the thriller horror movie about an AI doll that sort of goes on a rampage, more or less. It was pretty good. It wasn't amazing. I think what made the movie good was that it felt way too plausible. What the plot did, especially with how much we talk AI on this show a lot, or AI is playing a bigger part of our lives, that this movie hits a little closer to home than it would have even 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that's the chilling part about it. But overall, it was pretty good. It's like an hour hour and a half. It's very entertaining. So
how much horror is in it? My daughter that's her name. And so we were like, oh, we got to go see that, and, she's older, so it's not that big deal, but my wife hates horror. Like, so is it horror? Like
so it's PG-13. So it's pretty light. Okay. There's jump scares. But like to keep it PG-13, they kind of have to cut away at certain scenes. It's definitely not gory because they can't show much and keep the rating. So, I mean, I took one of my sons who's 12 to see it, and he did mostly okay. He had to cover his eyes a few times, but it's a pretty good like intro to horror if you have a kid that's around the like teenager age.
I saw the preview for that, and so I'll say I'm quite surprised, but pleasantly so, that it turned out to be good. It looked kind of cheesy, but I guess it didn't end up being that way.
It's a little cheesy, but it's just enjoyable. It's fun to see.
Cool.
And it's got that there's the TikTok dance that everybody got into, kind of thing. Cool. Well, Sam, so you have a pick for us?
Yeah. So I'm actually from North Carolina, but I'm not in North Carolina right now. I'm in Winter Park, Colorado. Cool. So I'm out here skiing for an entire month. And so my pick is definitely like skiing in Colorado.
Skiing for an entire month.
Yeah, nice. For an entire month. I would say people should not come to Winter Park. It's absolutely the worst resort. It's super crowded. It's just everything about this place is bad. So you should go somewhere else where I'm not, so that I can continue getting the short lift lines.
Are you being?
I'm totally kidding.
It's just like, this is a great place.
It's a great place. There's just kind of, I feel like it's a great place, but if too many people come to a great place, it becomes a little bit less great because it's just crowded and you're waiting in line for a long time. And so that's all I was getting at.
So let's say hypothetically you were somebody who's very bad at skiing, but still enjoyed doing it. Would I still be okay? Like, am I going to be intimidated off the lifts because I'm going to die going down these hills?
No. It's not that kind of place. I mean, they have some pretty gentle beginner terrain here, but they also have some terrifying expert terrain that I watch my friend do.
What does Sam ski? Double black diamond?
No. That's what I watched my friend do from the bottom yesterday. So they actually have a blue-black rating here, which is pretty nice. So like an advanced intermediate slope. So I do those, and I do the single black diamonds. I don't know if I will attempt a double black. I like having my legs and knees intact. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
This is what keeps me from skiing, at every age. I'm just like, this is cool, but I don't want to die over this.
Yeah, I know. I don't think I ever want to ski something where it's like you might die if you fall. Like, that's just not worth it.
One thing I learned with my kids that I feel like it helps a lot if you can learn it at a young age, because if you watch, like, my kids learned when they were like 7 or 8, and if you fall when you're 7 or 8, it's no big deal. You get right back up. Whereas I learned in my mid 30s, and when I fell, I could get back up, but it take a second, and I didn't fall lightly.
Yeah.
So
I know. I'm kind of envious of people who have been doing it since they're like 3, because I started at around 24. I'm 28 now. So like, it still can bounce back up, but maybe don't learn as fast as a child would.
Yes.
I think you got to be, live or be born in a mountain town.
Yeah. Which,
where you get that for like 6 months out of the year, and like the local pizza place has like, skis on the wall and blah, 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 that kind of place. And, and then if you live there, it's like, it's no big deal. All your buddies are up on the hill and all that. Right. And so, you learn when you're like 2.
Yeah. I'm guessing there's not many slopes in North Carolina.
There actually are, I believe, 5 resorts in North Carolina. Yeah. It's
like on the Appalachian side of the state?
Exactly. The western side. Yeah, it's pretty much the farthest south you can ski on the East Coast. And so the conditions are not great, but if you're just trying to learn, it's a good place to go.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. My pick this week is going to be a show called Midnight Gospel on Netflix. It is the weirdest thing I've seen in a long time. It helps if you are in a significantly altered state when you watch it. It is a weird combination of animation plus extreme violence plus long 25-minute rants on all kinds of metaphysics and this sort of stuff. It's like people talking about religion and philosophy while at the same time killing zombies or something like that. And the first episode is great. I think it's got Dr. Drew in it. and he talks about, various things, and at the same time he's like killing zombies, and it's hilarious, and they kind of wind it in like, so it's supposedly a podcast. It's just the weirdest. Netflix has this, the quality is extremely variable kind of thing, right? But this one, I don't know who their target audience is. I don't even know how they got a green light for this thing, but the fact that it exists is hilarious. It's like heavy metal. Like, how did they ever, the movie Heavy Metal, like, how did they ever get any money for that? But that it exists is awesome. Whatever. It's great.
Yeah, I'm looking just over the show, and it is very unique looking. I can definitely say that.
That's a word for it.
Usually not a compliment when someone says it.
But it can be, right?
It can be.
In a world where we have a million shows. That's
right.
If someone told me I was very unique, I would not take it. That's a good thing. It might depend on how they said it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it depends on the context.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that Southern thing where they say, "Oh, you're so special." It's like, that's not, you don't want to be
God bless you.
special in the South. Yeah. Bless your heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been really fun, Sam. Thank you for a deep education on CSS and JS and the issues thereof.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. We'll see everybody on the next React Roundup.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.